spend a few weeks looking at how God takes joy from us. He just looks at us and he's so full of joy in what he sees. And I think sometimes we forget that. And so this is an opportunity to take each week at a time and just listen to some of the promises God made us, some of the things that is real in our lives if we believe and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. And that sometimes when times are tough, we can forget. So hopefully this series will help build us up as individuals and build us up as a church. The last couple of weeks, we've seen Bob Telford talk to us about God seeing us and God choosing us. And if you haven't heard them, they're on Facebook. I believe they're on the website. Well worth going back and having a listen to. They are excellent talks with sometimes some tough things that we need to remember. This week, we're looking at God knowing us. So God knows you. And then next week, we move on to God hearing us. So, all of these are things that maybe we doubt at times, but hopefully the next few weeks will just encourage us. So my question to start with is what do you feel when you know that God knows you? God knows you. Does it make you scared? Does it make you feel comfortable, safe, or 1,000 other different things that I could mention? Personally, I think it's a phrase that can encompass all of those things, depending on your mood at the time, depending on the perspective of what we're thinking about, what you're going through, what you're thinking, what you're doing. God knows may make you feel good. It may make you feel bad. But it may, hopefully, will make you feel something. And my hope for this talk this morning is that we can examine what God means, that he knows us, not just us as a race, as a human race, but that he knows us individually, that he knows us now, and he knew us before we were formed in our mother's womb. And hopefully that will bring us to a place where the phrase brings us comfort, not fear. I'm going to be using Psalm 139, the first 12 verses or so, as a framework. If you want to follow it, that's where it is in the Bible. If you can't find it, Psalm 139 comes just after Psalm 138. So if you want to follow it, you don't need to. If you haven't got a Bible with you, because I'll be reading it as we go. We're going to start with the first 6 verses. So this is Psalm 139, verses 1 to 6. And it says this: "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain." Strong words, but hopefully, as we go through today, encouraging words. I want to take you back a few decades. Does anybody remember the TV series Mr. and Mrs.? I'm not sure if it was the 70s or the 80s. I can remember my mum, especially, I won't say my dad watched it, but my mum certainly watched it. I think it was rebooted a few years ago with a celebrity version, but I want you to go back to the 70s and the 80s if you were around and try and remember Mr. and Mrs. Host Derek Beatty, whatever happened to him? Derek Beatty, married couples would come together, and it was kind of a quiz. You would go through a series of rounds where they had to show that they had knowledge of their partner, that they knew each other so well that they could answer the questions correctly. And eventually you would get through to the grand final where I think it was 3 questions that they would ask each other. And one would be put into a soundproof box. And then they would put headphones on which would play music, which would suggest the soundproof box wasn't quite as soundproof as they tried to make out, in order that they couldn't hear anything what their partner was going to say. Their partner would be asked questions and they would give answers, and then they would swap. Same answers were given, questions were given rather, and their answers were given, written down, and then they were compared. Questions like, if you could go anywhere on holiday right now, where would you go? Or where would your partner go? Or where would you go to get this sort of thing? Favorite place in the world, dream job, things like that. Questions that, if you know each other, maybe you should know. Then in front of the audience, and obviously being recorded for television, their knowledge of each other would be tested. They would read the question out and then they would give the two answers. Sometimes the answers would match and there'd be smiles and there'd be prizes and there'd be lots of applause from the audience. But sometimes their answers didn't match and you could see the tension start to build. And we all know on TV, they love a bit of tension. It's probably not helped by the gasps of the audience, the laughter from the crowd as things start to go wrong. Slowly, the smiles become forced. The glances become awkward and the relationship becomes tested. Maybe they didn't know each other as well as they thought. Now, I have to admit, and I know Andy's on here somewhere watching this with the kids, Andy and I have been married 24 years, and in lots of ways, we know each other so well. And I can see lots of people online who have been married a long time, and you know each other. And sometimes you finish each other's sentences, and sometimes you know exactly what your partner's going to respond. But it doesn't mean we know them 100% all of the time. I know that if Andy and I did some of those Mr. and Mrs. questions, we'd probably get some wrong, because sometimes we change. Sometimes our thinking and our observations change over time. And I think it would be pretty impossible for a lot of us, 100% of the time, without fail or hesitation, say that you know somebody completely. But that is the claim that David is making in this psalm. He's making it about God, God's knowledge about us. Psalm 139 is saying that God knows us. He knows us completely. The imperfect knowledge of Mr. and Mrs. here is in sharp contrast with a God who David presents to us. God of infinite wisdom, complete and perfect knowledge. As David says, he knows us completely. Now, when our two girls, Poppy and Remy, were younger, we had a beautifully illustrated picture book all about Psalm 139. It took you through some of the words we've just heard and on through the rest, right, I think through to about verse 14 or 15. And if the girls got to choose which books we would have a story book and we'd have a Christian book each night. And nearly every night, the book from Psalm 139 would be chosen because it brought them comfort. It brought them a peace and a joy that maybe as adults we forget sometimes. Their simple childlike faith of that time was drawn to the wonder of God's knowledge. How could God know us before we were born? How could God know the hairs how many hairs there are on our head? Obviously, for some of us, that's easier than others. But God knows us. And as children, it fascinated them. And actually, we need to regain that fascination for God's desire to know us so intimately. Verse 1, O Lord, you have searched me and know me. Now, this is kind of a summary. It would have been quite normal at that time in the culture where David was, that you kind of start with a statement and then you go, and this is how I know. So what it basically is saying that David's saying, God knows me completely. And this is how he knows me. He would then unpack it. Some people sometimes get tripped up on the, you have searched me. He isn't saying you are searching for me or have been searching for me, because sometimes searching implies a lack of knowledge. How many of us at times search for our glasses only to find them on top of our heads? If we're searching for our glasses, it's because we don't know where our glasses are. That isn't true of God. God knows us and has searched us, not is searching for us. I almost see this as one of those scans you go for in hospital where you get put through the giant donut. Before that, the doctor may have had an idea what was wrong with you, but the scan reveals everything. The scan searches your body. It doesn't search for your body because it's there, but it searches your body and gives the doctor all the information about your body. And when David says that the Lord has searched me and knows me, he's trying to say that thing, that promise, that God knows you completely. It's a done deal. It's finished. It's job complete. Tick it off the list. He has accomplished it. He knows you. And he knows you may change, and he knows the good bits, the bad bits, the in-between bits. He knows you. Now, when the scanner at the hospital as you've gone through it and it's scanned everything, it's a done deal. When I found my glasses, it's a done deal. And that's what David's saying here, that God knows you. It's not a work in progress. God knows the you of the past, the you of the present, and the you of the future. And we will come to that in a little while. Verse 2, you know when I sit down and when I rise up, you understand my thoughts from afar. David here again is using a style of speech to show that it's complete. It's a done job. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. Two ends like bookends. He's naming two opposite things, and we do the same thing, don't we? Sometimes when we describe things, we want to show something in its fullness. We describe it in certain ways. These days, if I go on a journey in the car, then I use my phone. I use the maps, Google Maps, any maps, whatever maps I can find on my phone. I will put in my start point and my end point, and it will tell me where to go. It will give me alternatives. It will give me the route. But actually, I bet some of you still in your cars today have that map that takes you all the way around the country. That was probably out of date before it actually got printed. But how many of us have got that map? And what was that map called? The A to Z, which suggests it's complete. Would we have bought it if it said this is the A to Q of Coventry? Probably not, because we would have wanted a complete map. In that map, we knew we had all the streets, all the information, and all the opportunities to go wherever we wanted to go. There was supposedly nothing missing until they built a new roundabout or a road. Now, God knows all of my ways. He knows when I rise up in the morning to the point when I lay down at night, and all of the time we're asleep. Everything in between. He knows us. And he doesn't do that because he's standing over us all the time. As it just said, he understands our thoughts from afar. And just think about that for a moment. Sometimes we live as though God doesn't know what we're thinking, because that, can be quite scary. The thought God knows what we're thinking, not just what we're doing. Even behind closed doors, God knows what we're doing, but actually he knows what we're thinking. He knows where we're coming from, what our motivation is. The words that come out of our mouth, do they match what we're saying in our head? God knows everything that I'm thinking, that I'm longing for, and then what I'm frustrated about. That can be satisfying. It can be nice to know that somebody's there and gets you. But it can also be quite unnerving. What about that he knows the way I really feel about that neighbour that annoys me, but I'm always nice to? What if he then knows what I really think about when somebody walks in front of the television when I'm trying to watch the football? He knowing us and knowing our thoughts can be comforting and scary at the same time. And that's fine. Verse 3 says, you search out my path. You are acquainted with all my ways. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, this translates to search out, kind of that it means to explore, that you would explore, or words that have become quite appropriate in the last, appropriate maybe not be the right word, but around in the last year, to track and trace. So God wants to track and trace us. He wants to know where we are, where we're going, what we're doing. He wants to walk with us. Over the last year, we know we've had to trace ourselves, because of COVID. Whether you go to church, whether you go to shops, a cafe, wherever you are, there's little QR codes that you scan, and you have to give your name and address. Lots of people don't like it. I've heard lots of people go, I don't want people to know where I am. I'm not giving the government my details. And that's just a couple of things I've heard. But God's track and trace is a little bit different. If you don't scan your QR code at the supermarket or at the cafe, actually, there's not a lot people can do about it. But if you don't track and trace with God, he still knows where you are. There's no getting away from him. We know that because Psalm 139 goes on. Let me just find it for you. Starting at verse 7. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up into the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day. The darkness is as light to you. And so it goes on. God knows us. God knows where we are, where we're going. He follows our paths because he wants to walk with us. He wants to be in intimate relationship with us. And he's there. He's there all the time. But actually, if he's there and he's following our paths and he's with us, it's our job to turn and walk with him. He wants to be there with us, to comfort us, to bless us, to guide us, to encourage us, and to lead us. And I just think that's amazing. Verse 4, before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. It's a scary thought, isn't it? God knows what you're going to say before you say it. He knows you better than yourself. And as I said earlier, he knows the past. Well, that's kind of maybe not too difficult to get a grip on, that he knows what you've done. Well, lots of people know what you've done. In this family, I know what they've had for breakfast. I know what we did yesterday. I know what people said yesterday. But actually, God goes beyond that. He knows your heart. He knows how you feel. He knows how you felt yesterday. He knows how those words hurt you yesterday. He knows what you said but didn't say yesterday. Because the past has already happened. He knows it more intimately than anybody else, but he knows it. And God knows the present. Really, that's what the first couple of verses of this psalm is about. That God knows us now. He's in relationship with us now. It's not something he's promising, and it's not something that happened in the past. He's offering it now, every second of every minute of every day. And then he tells us he knows the future. And this is where it can be more difficult to understand or comprehend or engage with in our brain. Before the word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. Later in verse 16, it says, in your book were written every one of my words, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them. So God knows when we will be born. God knows when we will die. God knows what we'll do in between. And that can be terrifying and comforting in equal measure. God knows it all. And he knows you. As I look at the screen now, I can see people in church. People in church, God knows you intimately. Howard sitting on his sofa, I can see Howard, God knows you and loves you. And there's more and more. I can go through you all, but I can only got a few on the screen. God knows you and God knows me. And the thing that blows my mind, and I hope blows yours, is that God knows me and he still loves me. Even though he knows me more than anything anybody else could know. My darkest secrets, my nastiest thoughts, my worst habits, he knows me and he still loves me and he loves you. Job 31:4, does he not see my ways and number all my steps? Job asks. We have no reason to hide anything from him. I think sometimes we struggle to admit things to ourselves and admit things to others because, for whatever reason, maybe we feel failure or maybe we feel doubt or shame or whatever, but God knows already. So we can talk to him about everything in our lives. We can bring everything to him in a knowledge that he already knows. He won't be shocked. but he'd be overjoyed that you're bringing it to him and you can face it together. So freeing. I can bring my hurts, my difficulties, my struggles, my lack of knowledge, my lack of understanding, everything to the Lord. And he will understand. Think just of Thomas as an example. Thomas didn't understand. He didn't believe that Jesus was there. And God knew that. And Jesus just said, here, touch these scars. Look at my side. He knew what Thomas was thinking. He knew where he needed comfort. The other thing is that if you're known, then someone understands you completely. Someone is tracking you, in pursuit of you, to walk alongside you. Have you ever been in that situation where you're walking along and you sense that somebody's coming, somebody's around, somebody's behind you, someone's close to you? That sense they want to catch up to walk with you. Do you see the sense of worth that brings? That you're never alone. We live in a world at the moment where many of us are struggling with lockdown and isolation and mental health problems and just the anxiety of everything that's gone on. And we can feel very, very alone. Many of us have lost loved ones, lost friends, family, work situations have changed. Lots more people are working at home than we're working in a busy office, and it's tough. But the idea that someone knows how you're feeling, somebody that wants to track and trace you, to pursue you, to walk with you. Do you see a sense of worth that brings to each one of us, that of what value God sees in us, in what God sees in you? God knows you. He desires an intimate relationship with you. If you feel without hope, God brings hope. Some of you will have known the name Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain was the lead singer of a grunge rock group called Nirvana. Now, if anybody that knows Kurt Cobain, who he is, his music, he back in the 90s, he was probably one of the most successful singers as part of one of the most successful bands of that time. But in the middle of it, he felt hopeless. He felt alone. He felt worth nothing. Kurt Cobain killed himself. And this is a snippet of the note he left for his wife and his 19-month-old daughter. It says this: I have a daughter who reminds me too much of what I used to be. Full of love and joy, kissing every person she meets because everyone is good and will do her no harm. And that terrifies me to a point where I can barely function. I can't stand the thought of Francis, that's his child, becoming the miserable, self-destructive death rocker that I have become. Isn't that sad? To think that he could see in his daughter the joy, the hope, the future, and yet he couldn't hold on to it for himself. If only Kurt Cobain had seen Psalm 139 and was able to hold on to it for himself. And I'm sure that's how some of us feel at times. And I just want to remind you that if you feel invisible today, you are known. God is with you. If you feel alone today, you are loved. God is with you. If you feel worthless today, you are priceless to God. You are an ultimate treasure for God. God desires that intimate relationship with us, whether we are new to Christianity, whether we're still on that journey of faith, or whether actually we've crossed that finish line and given our life to Jesus. It can still be tough. And God says to us, I know you. I know you're struggling. I know it's tough. Or I know you're full of joy and everything's great. Let's celebrate that together. Let's do this together because I know you. And if nothing else this morning, I want you to hear that you are of infinite worth to God. But one thing we must address if we're going to move forward with this, and I know time's moving on, is that if God knows us completely, if he knows our thoughts, our intentions, and he knows the future, maybe the question is, why doesn't he step in? If he knows, then why does he allow? And that's a tough one. Last week, Bob said some of the stuff he was talking about was tough. And this is a tough one. This is something I struggle with a lot. If God knows, why does he allow the bad things to happen? Excuse me. You only have to read the prayer list in our own church, or watch the news, or anything, to see that there's pain and suffering out there. During this year, more than any other, there's been pain and suffering out there. And many people who want to push back against God said, well, if you know me, if you love me, why do you allow these things to happen? And there's a whole branch of theology. No, I'm not a theologian. A whole branch of theology called open theism, which attempts to explain this away. Open theism tries to say that they use the example of actually there are some parts of our future, especially our choices, our free will, that cannot be known in advance, even by God. But that suggests the opposite to Psalm 139. It's a difficult area, especially after this, as I say, this COVID year. So much bad has gone on in our life, so much that we're out of control of. And people want to blame God. I can remember when I first became a Christian, I used to ask people, why when things go wrong, do people blame God, but when things go right, we praise ourselves? And that's the lack of knowledge of a new Christian. But it just struck me that we want to blame a God that a lot of people will say they don't believe in, but when things go amazingly well, we don't want to thank a God that lots of people may not believe in. And I'm not going to try and hide away from this fact that actually, I'm not going to try and use theology as pick out a few verses of the Bible and go, that's why. Some things we don't understand. Sometimes we can't put God in a box. We can't explain it away. Sometimes things actually come down to faith. Have we got the faith to still walk with this God that we don't fully understand? And we're a musical theatre family. We love going to the theatre and watching musical theatre. And barely a day goes by where Poppy especially isn't singing a song from a show called Hamilton, which is the story of one of America's founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. And I'm scared to say it because I could probably hear singing upstairs already. But in that, there's a whole song where one of the lead female characters is trying to explain something, a letter that's been written to her, and she's reading into what one comma means. Well, if he'd put the comma there, then it means this. But actually, you put the comma there, so I think it means this. And she's trying to justify everything through a comma. And I think sometimes we try and justify God by putting him in a box, and that isn't always possible. Why do things happen? Why do people die? Why do awful things happen in this world? Why do people suffer that we think don't deserve to suffer? And why do those that we think deserve to don't? Actually, it's not our place to judge, is it? It's God's place. But also, we just don't know. I could fill you with platitudes. We could say all those things that we try and say when people struggle. But that doesn't justify God. And it doesn't help. But what I still will say is that whilst I don't always understand what he's doing, God does say, I'm here to hurt with you and to walk with you and to bring you hope in the midst of a tragedy. I can remember many, many years ago, I worked for another place. We had a group of trustees, and one of our youngest trustees was only in his early 30s with a young family, married with, I think, 2 or 3 daughters. And we got a phone call to say his wife had died overnight. And nobody could understand. And I still don't really understand. But at her Thanksgiving service, I travelled up to go to the Thanksgiving service. Her husband stood up on the platform with her children and their children and said, I don't understand. I don't understand why she had to go now. But I trust in a God who loves me. And sometimes that's all we can do. If we know that God knows us and loves us, we don't always understand everything. We just need to trust in a God who loves us. And that's what I fall back on, and I hope you can too. It's the certainty that without Jesus, I have no hope. My hope comes through the cross, where Jesus Christ died to forgive me, to forgive you, for the sins that we carry with us every day. If God doesn't exist in this world, then there's no meaning. It's either God, either Christ, or nothing. Because nothing else gives me hope that fills both my heart and my brain. Just Jesus Christ. And I'd rather hope in a God that I don't fully understand, because that's faith. Because I can't believe in random chance. I can't believe in a big bang. But I can believe in a God that sent Jesus to die for me. I can't explain away the problems that many of us have with God knowing before we do, God knowing before we say. But I do trust in a God who loves us. A colleague, again, a few years before I even knew them, my colleague was in his early 20s. His brother was a teenager. And again, his mum died. And on the day of the funeral, the younger brother was seen in a room, heard in a room, shouting out to God. This was an amazing Christian family, shouting out to God, "Why, God? Why did you take mum?" And then he went quiet. And they found out later that he'd heard a response. He heard God say, "Ask me in 5 years," which is the weirdest response ever. No platitudes, no, look, you're going to be fine. Just ask me in 5 years. And almost 5 years to the day, the same guy remembered. And he realized he didn't have to ask anymore. That God had walked with him through that tragedy, through those awful years. And he didn't have to ask anymore. He just trusted in a God that knew. We need to leave it to God. We need to trust in him. Whether it's a good day or a bad day, we celebrate with God. Because without him, we're lost and hopeless. We're coming to an end. The last little bit. So what? So why is it good that God has knowledge of our life? Why is it good that God is ultimately of knowledge of everything? And I think it comes down to verse 5. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. So that, coming again back to the Hebrew, and as I say, I'm not a theologian, this is only stuff I found online, that hemming in, it means like pressing down, as if you are a city under siege, that God will surround you back and front, all around, and protect you. And then he says, and I lay my hand upon you. A few weeks ago, the kids and I were watching a film on the TV, and there was this big battle going on, and the hero had this kind of thing on where she could surround people and protect them, almost like you see, I think it was the Roman guards that used to be able to form this shape with their shields that would completely encapsulate them so they were safe. But this goes further than that. It says, I will protect you. I will be before you, behind you, and I will lay my hand upon you. And that's just that vision of protection, that vision of knowledge of you intimately, and a knowledge of when you just need that hand, that touch of your Father. Not protection from suffering, he doesn't promise that, but protection of a Father's arms, strong arms that will never leave, will never walk away, not even for a minute. Protection from a Father whose chest is big enough, broad enough for us to beat, for us to weep upon. And I don't know about you, but I can live with that. I'm happy with that. I will trust in a God that I don't always understand, but that loves me and knows me. And I hope it's the same for you this morning. I'm going to pray, and then I'm afraid I don't know what the next song is, but there'll be a song, and then we'll hand back to Dave. So let's just pray for a moment together. Lord, I thank you that you know me, that you know us individually, that you know what we need, how we feel, where we feel we've failed, where we feel without hope, where we feel lost. And Lord, you promise that you'll go before us, that you'll have our back, and that you'll surround us. And that in all of that, we'll have that sense of your hand upon us, just telling us it's going to be okay. Lord, may we trust in you today, whether we're new Christians who need to give our lives to you, or whether we're long-serving Christians. Lord, help us to know that you know us. We heard last week that you chose us. We know that you see us. But Lord, you know us intimately, individually, and you pleasure in knowing us. Help us to know you more. Help us to trust you more. And help us to reach out to you, Lord, in knowledge that you are there, waiting to put your arms around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.